It's Aleximo, and every once in a while I dig way too deep into the lore of the Pokemon anime.
It's December now, and the holiday spirit is getting me excited, so I went and watched the Pokemon anime's Christmas special, Holiday Hijinks. In this episode, Ash saves Christmas, and it got me thinking, how exactly does Christmas, work in the Pokemon world? How was the holiday created? Is Jesus canon in the Pokemon world? Today, we're going to be looking at a bunch of Pokemon-related Christmas media to figure out what the story is. Let's do it.
Before we analyze this fictional world's Christmas, it's imperative to understand how Christmas came about in the real world. In the Western world, there tend to be two sides to the Christmas celebrations. There's the religious Christian holiday and the commercialized holly jolly holiday. We got here through a hodgepodge of different cultures dating back thousands of years.
Many ancient civilizations had their own way of celebrating the winter solstice, such as the Romans' festival of Saturnalia. This festival gave thanks to Saturn, their god of agriculture, after their planting season had been completed.
They'd have a week of celebration in the final days of December, similar to our current Christmas season. The Norse had their own winter traditions in the form of Yule, where they decorated the Yule tree. Finland celebrated their sun goddess Biwi around this time, who was said to ride on a sleigh of reindeer bones.
The Greeks and Slavs had their own traditions, and you can see how all of these different traditions mirror things that we see in our current day Christmas. Now, we'll get to how the Christians got involved soon, but first I want to talk about mistletoe, and yes, this is going to be very important later on when we talk about the Pokemon stuff. A ton of the previously mentioned cultures had their own traditions around mistletoe. The Romans actually considered it sacred to their god Saturn and would perform fertility rituals under it, and we're going to keep it at fertility rituals because I don't want to be demonetized.
The Druids had their own take on mistletoe, where it protected them from evil spirits and inspired peace and joy. The Norse and Celts also had their own takes on mistletoe, and you can see how when all these come together, you could get a tradition of kissing under the mistletoe. Okay, now we can talk about the Christians. In the first few centuries of the religion's existence, the members went around Europe trying to get everyone to join their religion. They considered every other religion to be paganism, where the pagans were basically just anyone who wasn't a Christian. In order to get the pagans to unlearn everything they ever knew and agree that Christianity was the truth, the Christians had to find some common ground. One way they did this was by unifying all of their winter solstice traditions with the pagan traditions. They celebrated the birth of Jesus at a similar time, so they incorporated this into already existing ideas such as Yule, Saturnalia, etc. Well, they said Jesus was born on December 25th, but many historians actually doubt that, but let's look over that for now. This is a Pokemon video, not a Christian deep dive.
So basically, the Christian holiday and the pagan stuff all got blended together into this big Christmas smoothie, and that's what Christmas is today.
We should also probably talk about Santa Claus. Saint Nicholas was like a real guy around the 4th century. He was said to have a long beard and handed out gifts to children and the poor. Over years and years, he got sewn together with pagan traditions, possibly the previously mentioned Biwi, or even the Norse god Odin. And closer to our time, he got a fresh coat of paint from Coca-Cola and became the amalgamation we know and love as Santa.
Now, that's all good and dandy. That's how Christmas came about in the Western world. But we're talking about Pokemon, an anime that was created in Japan. Shouldn't we consider Japan's Christmas traditions?
But yeah, all these Western traditions made their way to Japan, and the holiday is more or less celebrated the same, with a little extra KFC. Alright, there's a ton of background information. Now let's fast forward a few hundred years to October 5th, 1998. In October 98, the episode Holiday Hijinks aired in Japan, almost a year after it was originally intended, thanks to our pal Porygon. This is the only episode of the anime to deal with Christmas, but there are some animated shorts and other pieces of media we'll talk about later as well. Holiday Hijinks opens on Team Rocket planning to kidnap Santa in order to steal all of the presents, with Jessie having some sort of Santa-related trauma. Supposedly 10 years prior, Santa came down her chimney and stole her favorite doll. Furthermore, Santa isn't a human, but actually a Jinx. No, not that one. Yeah, that one. Separate from Team Rocket, Ash and friends run into a Jinx of their own who just so happens to be Santa's Jinx. She went missing and needs to find her way back to Santa's workshop. Ash attempts to swim all the way from Kanto to the North Pole and fails because that sounds really hard. So Santa's Lapras comes by and saves them, while the Team Rocket trio tails them. The cast arrives at the North Pole, an icy landscape with a giant tree, and of course, Santa's workshop. We also see a ton of Jinxes, with them replacing the elves in this version of Christmas. Team Rocket does their best to seal Santa's presents, and of course they fail, leading to Santa delivering a lesson about Christmas spirit. He tells Jessie that only someone with an open heart and who believes in Christmas can be reached by Santa on Christmas Day. Santa hops in his sleigh, notably pulled by a flying ponyta, and heads on his way to deliver presents on Christmas Day. As they approach Team Rocket's place, Jinx uses Sweet Kiss to put them to sleep and delivers them their presents. Finally, the episode ends as the narrator states, quote, "This is one Christmas our friends will never forget, and I think Santa's gonna remember this for a long time too."
Now, there's a ton to analyze here, and I'm going to start with that last quote from the narrator. He says that Christmas was so eventful that he knows Ash and his friends will never forget it. But he thinks Santa's only going to remember it for, quote, a long time. Now, this probably doesn't mean this much, it's just wording, but there's something behind this wording. And this is giving me the impression that Santa has some sort of immortality or lengthened lifespan. Hear me out. The narrator is more hesitant of how long Santa's going to remember it. He only considers the possibility of forgetting it for Santa, not Ash. Forgetting happens with time, so maybe the narrator is assuming since Santa lives some thousands of years, he could forget this event way into the future. And yes, I'm going stupidly deep with this analysis.
I do want to talk about how this episode hammers in the fact that the North Pole and Santa are just common knowledge. Ash, friends, and Team Rocket just know he exists, and nobody questions it. There's not a single person who believes Santa doesn't exist, so we know he's well known. Even Jessie, who closed her heart to Christmas, still believed Santa existed in some form. I think a fun plot point is that Jinx puts the Rocket Trio to sleep with Sweet Kiss when they deliver presents. This gives an explanation to anyone who hasn't seen Santa or fell asleep trying to catch him. He has a way of keeping people asleep so he's not found out. That's pretty neat.
It's also important to note that every piece of Christmas we see in this episode mirrors pagan Christmas, nothing to do with the religious side. Because of this, I'm starting to think the Pokemon world's Christmas definitely leans towards a pagan Christmas and how it was created, but we'll see more as we go on deeper. Once we look at the other pieces of Christmas-related Pokemon media, I'm going to craft my own theory on how this in-universe holiday came about. So let's get on to these shorts.
There are 3 Christmas-related Pokemon shorts: Christmas Night from 98, Stantler's Little Helpers from 99, and Delibird's Dilemma from 2000. These tend to have cute plots of Ash's Pokemon helping Santa save Christmas. They're not that important individually, but let's focus on the bits of lore or interesting moments. Christmas Night really doesn't have anything of interest except maybe champagne. It's probably just sparkling water. Stantler's Little Helpers has something more bizarre. This Christmas, Santa's Stantler gets sick and he has a hard time flying. But last time we saw Santa, he had a Ponyta. Here, Santa says he can't fly without Stantler, so it seems he doesn't have Ponyta on hand to continue the trek. So, what happened? Why did he replace Ponyta? Did he release it? We're gonna come back to this later. Finally, there's Delibird's Dilemma, where we see Santa's Delibird, which again he didn't have in his first episode. Now, obviously the reason for these new team members is they didn't exist in the first generation, but I'm here for the lore, dang it. I suppose he would have just ran into and caught Delibird somewhere between the first visit with Ash and this short, but again, we're gonna talk more about this later. Okay, that's all the shorts, but we've got one more piece of media to look at. The Pokemon Christmas Bash CD. This was made by 4Kids, so its canonicity is questionable at best, but I think there's a thing or two we can learn from it.
This CD takes place at a Christmas party with Ash, his friends, Professor Oak, the whole gang. Each song has its own storyline about something happening at the party, and there is a dangerous amount of poke shipping thrown in. Over this album, the cast celebrates a ton of pagan Christmas traditions, such as building snowman, roasting chestnuts, and of course singing Christmas carols. One detail I really want to look at is from track 7, called Under the Mistletoe. First of all, this song is really good. Veronica and Rachel are phenomenal singers, and this might be the only time you ever see me actually liking poke shipping.
Anyway, this song revolves around Misty wanting to meet Ash under the mistletoe. Remember 12 paragraphs ago when I said we're going to talk about mistletoe? This stuff was super important to a ton of pagan cultures, and here it is very prominently showing up with the same role. So I think this serves as more evidence for Pokemon Christmas being derived from specifically pagan Christmas.
On the other end of the spectrum, we have track 5, titled Nobody Don't Like Christmas, where Meowth complains about every holiday under the sun, including Yom Kippur. We've got our first mention of actual religion in Pokemon right now. Yom Kippur is a very important holiday in Judaism, and now we've got to wonder if Judaism is canon to the Pokemon world. Now, obviously Christmas isn't a Jewish holiday, but Christianity essentially evolved from Judaism. And if Judaism is canon to the Pokemon world, we've got some evidence towards a religious origin for the Pokemon version of Christmas.
We're almost done, but I want to touch on the few other times religion was mentioned in the show. In episode 16, Brock mentions Noah from the Bible, and yes, this was in the original Japanese. Furthermore, in episode 19, Misty tries to ward off Ghost with the cross. So, is Jesus canon? Alright, we took notes on literally everything we know about Christmas in the Pokemon world. Now it's time to analyze the lore and figure out how the holiday came about in universe.
First off, I don't think there's actually any religious influence here. I managed to find the slightest bit of evidence that religion could exist in this universe, assuming it wasn't all retconned out later. But with everything in mind, none of the religious mentions from the show have any relation to the holiday. The Yom Kippur line was too much of a stretch. There is nothing there. So, was the Pokemon world's Christmas just derived from ancient winter solstice traditions? Most likely, but I think there's a bit more.
What is Santa's lore in this universe? In real life, Christmas and pagan ideologies came together and the concept of Santa was birthed later on. But here, Santa is a real person. I'd be willing to bet the Pokemon world's Christmas was formed through a mix of winter solstice celebrations, basically the pagan stuff, as well as Santa's influences. My final theory goes as follows, though there are still unknowns. In the ancient past, Santa was born. His origin, unknown. But I'd be willing to bet he was born somewhere in the north, near the North Pole. I wanted to say maybe the Alabaster Icelands, but Jinx can't be found there, so it's off the table. Wherever he was from, it has to be somewhere where Jinx inhabit. In fact, I think the Jinx being his elves gives us a ton of evidence to his origin. They're part psychic and ice type, so I'd bet their combined psychic powers may be why Santa has magic and possibly immortality. Their ice type explains why they stay at the North Pole to work, because they become stronger in the cold. Furthermore, this explains why Santa chose the winter season for his holiday. It's when him and his Pokemon have the most power. With that in mind, Santa would have been a naturally giving person, and he chose to give out gifts yearly with the help of his Jinxes. He does this in the winter as it's when his Pokemon have the most power, and it just so happens to overlap with pagan winter solstice traditions. So just like the real world, the gift-giving of Santa gets blended together with different cultures' winter celebrations. Over time, the Christmas we know today is formed, where people and Pokemon celebrate with presents, trees, and snow. Santa may have some form of immortality, but it's possible his Pokemon do not. The Jinx could be descendants of prior helpers, and this also explains why Ponyta was replaced with Stantler. Ponyta may have gotten old and retired, with a new Pokemon Stantler taking its place. Perhaps past Christmases he flew around with other Pokemon, such as Weirdeer. He always has the Jinxes, but occasionally retires and catches new Pokemon, such as his Delibird.
There you go, that's how Christmas was created in the Pokemon world. Jesus is not canon, which begs the question, why is it called Christmas? The word Christmas is clearly derived from the term Christ, and Christ isn't canon. Or is he?
Alright, we're pretty much done here. In this video, I specifically analyzed the lore of Christmas in the Pokemon anime, though it's referenced in other parts of the franchise too. There's this Flaffy card from the early aughts, and a whole slew of holiday alts in Masters EX. But if anything's less canon than a 4Kids CD, it's Masters EX.
This is quite possibly the weirdest video I've ever made, but it was really fun to research. I'm on winter break from college right now, so there's a chance I might even get some more videos out before I return to all that academic rigor, but who knows, I might just catch up on all the sleep-ins. If you made it this far, thank you so much for sticking through this weird video, and I hope you have a very merry holiday season.